Hi, I'm Lori Bertrand. I'm your host of RNESU Spotlight. It's February, so guess what? We're talking about the budget. I'm here today with Jean Collins, Superintendent of Schools, and Brenda Fleming, our business manager. And we're going to tell you all there is to know about the budget and how we are going to make sure that you vote for yes for it. So, here we go, ladies.
Okay, so we're going to start with the Outer Valley budget, and we have a couple of slides we'll move in and out of as we go, but the budget process actually starts way back when last year's budget is approved, and we put that one to bed, and we start living within that one, and over the summer and in the fall, we look at what changes we've made in hiring, what new staff comes on, and we spend a lot of time, Brenda spends a lot of time with principals kind of truing up, you know, okay, we lost a teacher here, but we hired this teacher, and this teacher has more or less insurance, and that kind of stuff, or we know there's a pregnancy or a marriage or some change in situation, so that we can make sure that what we bring forward to the board in October is as complete in the current year as it can be. And then the board has discussions throughout the fall, of course, about what's driving the budget, which for us are mission and vision, and the Outer Valley ends policy, which you just renewed or redid in November. Mm-hmm. The goals that we have within the district. And of course, it's been a major focus of the Outer Valley Board since the Act 46 merger to look at equity for our students. Are we providing equal opportunity for all of our students, which when we had multiple boards and multiple size schools, there wasn't really that oversight or ability to do that. And so that's a real advantage that the Outer Valley Board has taken advantage of. For example, the small schools didn't used to have library services or guidance services. True. And now, under the merger, you're able to provide that. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, looking at whatever efficiencies we could look at. So throughout November, the Outer Valley Board receives kind of the preliminary information, and in December, with the guidance that the Outer Valley Board provided, Brenda and I bring a proposal in December for the board saying this is where we know what we believe is needed for next year, and this is where we believe we can cut from this year for next year, because we know that your goal is both to meet the needs of students as well as to make sure that it's an affordable budget for the taxpayer. And that's right. Always a difficult balance. So that's kind of the process. And specifically our goals, the vision and mission were up on the TV for a moment, but our goals, we kind of build our budget around these particular goals, which will help us meet the vision and mission. And the three goals are to making sure that we have strong academic and emotional supports focused on student achievement, that we are improving our instructional practices to meet the needs of all of our students. And then we have had a particular spotlight on, get that? A particular spotlight on literacy, particularly focusing on the early grades, because we know that the stronger literacy skills that a child has by the end of grade 2, the better they will do throughout school. And we're in our second year of that goal. So, and there's a review of the process once again. During the budget process, we also bring you quite a bit of data. And this entire PowerPoint, which I'm scrolling through pretty quickly, is on the RNESU website. So people could go back and look at it more fully if they'd like. But we look at class sizes, we look at what our enrollment changes, how many students are we graduating, how many students do we expect to bring in, where are the shifts happening, and what services are we providing. And we also look at our after school and summer programming and let you know where that fund balance is. So ultimately, the budget. So in this year's budget, which the board discussed in December and January and got some community input on, the ultimate decision was that focusing on our goals, that we are looking at adding an academic interventionist at the high school to help us with a system of supports for students. A student behavioral support professional for Neshobe School, and tweaking a couple of other positions at the high school and at pre-K and at Neshobe to make sure that we have a comprehensive health program and vocational education program. The pre-K edition is actually going to be partially funded with tuition from out-of-district students attending the Whiting Preschool. We also, the board had committed under our vision around wanting globally minded students, the board had committed to elementary Spanish 2 years ago across all Otter Valley elementary schools in grades really 5 and 6. Our one Spanish teacher who's covering all 4 schools recommended that we add a second if we want to dig in deeper into Spanish. Right now, students are getting it once a week, which is barely touching, and for usually 30 to 40 minutes. So with an addition of a new Spanish teacher, students in grades 4 to 6 will get it twice a week for 45 minutes. In addition, looking at our enrollment numbers, particularly at Otter Creek Academy, we are reducing one teacher. Again, that's part of the balance of this is what we need and this is what we can now do without. And that still keeps enrollment numbers down. Next year, Otter Creek Academy is anticipated to have 18 to 20 students. So by cutting from 2 teachers to 1 teacher, we're still within our class size guidelines. This budget still focuses on smaller primary class sizes, still focuses on primary literacy. It also adjusts as salary and benefits adjust. I want to point out that health insurance, which the state has now negotiated, is up 12.9% next year. It adjusts to utilities, although we have some good news around utilities in Otter Valley, supplies. And so all of that is built into this. So with that, I'd like Brenda to talk numbers.
Okay, so this graph just looks at the numbers in 2 different fashions. It kind of looks at where are we currently, what's our current budget and what departments or what programs does it support on the left-hand chart. And on the right-hand chart, it really talks about what we are buying and where we are spending most of our funds. So as you can see, predominantly direct instruction, student support, instructional staff is a big piece of our budget, is the biggest piece of our budget. And that means it's employee driven. And so if you look to the right, you'll notice that our salaries and benefits are also big drivers of the budget. On the chart on the right, the professional services line looks like a big jump. Professional services includes all of the costs associated with running special education, all technology costs, curriculum costs, central office costs. And so that budget is also predominantly a salary and benefit driven budget. So it's really just an opportunity to kind of look at the budget in 2 different fashions and kind of break it down as to what programs we have and how much they cost and what items we are purchasing.
And so also on that slide, if you note at the top, the actual expenditure budget is up 2.2%, $441,500.
Yeah, that's a good number to talk about.
Yeah.
Thank you for pointing out the top line. Yeah. This budget really just is a visual of where are we spending our resources. And as you look at it, you can see that a bulk is direct instruction. That means literally in a classroom. Student support services, things like library media, instructional guidance, and then instructional staff support, instructional staff support is library media. Then there's transportation and obviously the facilities. So as you kind of look at everything that directly impacts the delivery of services and how we deliver them and how we get students to us and how we house them, we're spending about 83% of our budget on those. Board and general administration is about 8%. The central office is broken down in 2 categories. We have centralized all technology services because it's a more efficient way to deploy resources to keep with our replacement schedule and our changing enrollments. So as a class moves into the high school, if more students come in, so might equipment as well, and vice versa. So deploying that at the centralized level allows for more flexibility and better efficiency in maintaining, deploying, and utilizing services. So of that 8%, 3% is what people think traditionally of as central office, and 5% is the technology piece. And then, of course, school administration is the principal offices, and debt service is the long-term facility debts. This slide really shows you, again, it is built by what we buy or what we've purchased, and it kind of shows you the history over time with what we actually spent in 2019, what our current budget is, and what is the proposed. And so you can see that the growth is in salaries and in benefits and professional services, which is salaries and benefits, and pretty much everything else is flat.
Now the numbers.
So this is what it all means when you boil it down. So as Jean indicated earlier, the total budget is up 2.2%. From that gets converted into a tax rate and what it means to individual taxpayers. So first we have to take out the revenue that is not used to, that doesn't need to be raised in property taxes. That's called local revenue. And then we get the number that is really, this is the bottom line that the board controls, and that's net education spending. And that, again, is up 2.23, just a smidgen different than the budget. Then equalized pupils is a formula that is determined on the number of students over the last 2 years. And it is weighted with different factors that the Agency of Education and statute have indicated it should be increased for. So it's weighted down for preschool students because they only attend 10 hours a week. It's weighted up for high school students because of the uniqueness of 7 through 12 education, where teachers' licensing have to be department or discipline specific. Their class sizes can be smaller. So there is recently a weighted study that the legislature commissioned that indicates that maybe there might be changes to it in the future, but this is where we're at right now. What's challenging with this number is that it is reliant on all schools within the state feeding data to the agency cleaning data, sorting data, and manipulating it or calculating it through the formula and sending it back to us. So this number has changed since the printing of this report throughout those iterations, and they have not, and it will probably change again before it's finalized. The good news is it's increased instead of decreased. So the number of equalized pupils will change, and it will affect the budget in the long run, but not the
when
planning.
we have more students, the tax rate goes down.
Correct.
Because there's
less spending per kid.
Yes.
Right.
So the driver in the tax rate is the next line, which is the education spending per equalized pupil. And you can see that our proposed budget is up $572 or 3.8%.
based on the equalized pupils that were counted on December 31st, which we already know is changing.
That we already know has changed at least once. Yeah. It's good to note the far right-hand corner has what the tax commissioner, the state tax commissioner, used when estimating and making recommendations to the legislature on what to budget for the yield. And they were using 5.53 as a growth percentage. They were also assuming, and that's actually a typo, they were actually assuming that the education spending per equalized pupil would be $17,133. It is currently this year $16,238. We are proposing $15,399. So our proposed budget for 21 is below the current year $16,233, and the projection that the commissioner made is $17,133. So what does that all mean? So the commissioner uses the information to recommend a yield to the legislature. The legislature has to adopt the yield. So this is just based on the commissioner's recommendation, which he provides December 1st of every year. And through the calculation and the information that they have, they announced a yield of $10,883. And what that means is for every spending, for the first $10,833 of our proposed spending of $15,399, we have a $1 tax rate. Because we're spending above $10,883, our tax rate is going to go above $1. And so our spending above is 41%, so we are proposing a tax rate of 1.41.
A unified tax rate.
The unified tax rate. That is up 2 cents, and we, in the current year, had the last year of the Act 46 incentives. So we are, this budget is proposing a 4.5 cent tax increase, depending on rounding, on the unified rate. Again, that means we are proposing a homestead unified rate of 1.41, maybe 1.42, depending on how districts round. The tax commissioner estimated that the average rate throughout the state is $1.56.
So again, we're below.
We're still below.
So we are still below. So what that means in local towns is where things differ, and they differ depending on the local town's common level of appraisal. And the common level of appraisal, as confusing as it is the statewide mechanism to true up cost to collect the right amount of taxes. And they can't control what the towns list their property values on, but they can control what the tax rate is. So they control the second side of the formula. And in order to do that, they take a look at the actual sales in a town versus compared to how those properties were listed in the town. And they take a 3-year average and they determine that your common level of appraisal is X. So if we look at just Brandon, for example, what they have determined is that their common level of appraisal is 98.77, which is a good number. That's very close to 100, but it's not 100. And so that means that our unified tax rate of $1.41 is adjusted to that CLA. So it has to be adjusted a little bit higher because their common level of appraisal is a little bit under 100%. What becomes another layer of confusion on the common level of appraisal is when you're looking at the difference between this year and last year, as most people are when they're looking at their tax bill, you have to understand what last year's common level of appraisal was as well, because that was factored into what your actual tax bill was. And so in Brandon's case, last year's common level of appraisal was 102%. So if you look at the column above, the current year, the $1.37, the current year homestead tax rate was adjusted down a smidgen because their appraisal was a little bit above 100. So the CLA is should be, and we like to see it close to 100. There are actual requirements in law that if your CLA goes down to 80%, it triggers a reappraisal. But our tax rate and what individuals see on their tax bill is dependent on their local CLA.
Mm-hmm. And we don't control that, that's the market.
That's the market that controls that. And so we can't control that, the select board can't control that, the neighbors can't control that. So this grid kind of shows you what we are projecting for each individual's homestead tax rate based on the information we know at budget printing time. It also is important to note that this is the, if you will, worst case scenario. So this is the rate that is applied to your homestead if you have no income sensitivity protections. But there are income sensitivity protections written into the law that if your household income is below approximately $96,000, you may be eligible for a reduction, and you may pay based on your income versus your property value. We can't begin to predict that for individuals because that's a personal information. There is a worksheet on the agency of on the State of Vermont Property Evaluation and Review website that people can run through, but generally speaking, you could follow that percentage change, and you would be fairly close unless your income unless your household income changed drastically.
So it does vary wildly in the different towns, and again, that's because of the common level of appraisal in each town.
Correct.
The part on this chart that the board is responsible for and has control over is all the way up at the net education spending, and the rest of it is either formula driven or CLA driven. So that's the end of the Otter Valley proposal, budget proposal. Anything, Lori, that you want to?
Well, one thing we should mention is that the Otter Valley meeting will be December, oh my goodness, is February 26th at 6:30 at the OV auditorium.
Correct.
So that's important. So if you have questions or concerns, definitely come to that meeting or use the Let's Talk app and ask your question, and one of us will get back to you.
Also, there are 4 school board seats up for re-election this year.
That's true.
2 of them have people who have filed petitions. One's a returning board member and one's a former board member. And there are 2 that are still open. So if people are interested, the petition timeline is over with, but if people are interested in write-in ballots, then.
And the write-in ballot would be for Brandon. There's a Brandon seat that's open for write-in, and an at-large, which would be available for any town, any town who wanted to do that. So
with your permission, Ms. Chair of RNESU, we'd
and
like to do,
OVUU.
and OVUU, we'd like to do a brief run-through of the Barstow budget. We don't have as much time, so we won't spend as much time on the slides repeating information, but
Sure.
if that's all right.
Yep.
Because our RNESU does consist of both districts.
Right.
So Barstow goes through the same process and has a similar ends policy, and you know, the same goals that we follow. Their particular budget proposal for this year it's really a status quo budget with an addition of a 50% interventionist or teacher, looking at class sizes and student needs. The determination of whether they'll be supporting a teacher or a teacher classroom needs to be made closer to the beginning of the school year. Also, they ended up picking up a tuition payment for a student who lives on the Chittenden-Pittsfield border for the next few years, and so that gets added into this budget. Utility increases do affect them, do not affect Otter Valley as much, particularly as a result of Otter Valley going to wood pellet furnaces and the solar panels and kickback for the Otter Valley campus. But Barstow, as a single school, is more liable for those heating cost increases. Also, it's important to note that the high school tuition estimates, they are going down by 2 students next year where they're paying for high school students. And so ultimately, with all of those changes, they have an increase of $242,000. That's 200 less than Otter Valley, but because it's a much smaller budget, that's actually a 5% increase. Also provided information, this PowerPoint is also on the RNESU website, and this provides information on class sizes and where the Barstow students attend high school and what those costs are. And this chart, I'll turn to Brenda. We can make it bigger. There you go.
Okay, so this chart is Barstow is unique in that it is a unified district, and it unifies the town of Minden and Chittenden, but it has one school. And so it has the Barstow Memorial School, which services students pre-K through 8. And so this chart kind of looks at the actual that happened in 2019, the current year budget of 20, and our proposed budget by level. So preschool, elementary, and when we say elementary here, we're saying pre-K through 8, and then the high school. And it just kind of shows you, and then the district-wide expenses that service all 3 levels. And it just kind of shows you a little bit of where the funds are and how they're distributed between those levels.
That's right. It's not a PowerPoint, it's a PDF.
It's a PDF.
Okay.
I think if you go to the tax chart, I think, again, it might help. Oh, there's no tax chart in this one, so go to the one more. Okay. So again, the state recommended 10,883 yield, which is up a little bit from this year. And that means that for every $108.83 per student per equalized pupil, that's a cent on the tax rate. So in Barstow's case, 1 cent is approximately $33,790.
We're up by 220,000.
This too is before the final. This is not the final one because it doesn't have that.
Right. Yeah.
It doesn't have the tax page.
Right. Do you want me to open the,
Yeah, if you have it.
yeah, you can,
So is Barstow seeing an increase in students, or are they following the trend of?
That's a good question. So Barstow has leveled off in the K through 8 enrollment,
Okay.
but they are decreasing in the high school. So last year they decreased 12 students.
Okay.
And saw a very minor, less than 1% budget increase because of that decrease.
Okay.
As I mentioned earlier, equalized pupil is a 2-year average. And so what that is doing is it takes a while for that reduction to catch up. And so while Barstow benefited last year from a very minor homestead tax increase because they had not the expenses associated with those 12 high school students, but they were still proportionately counted in their equalized pupil. So Barstow is seeing a higher increase in their ed spending per equalized pupil because that reduction is starting to catch up. They have reduced equalized pupils approximately 7 students, I believe, and are therefore spending per equalized pupil is rising a little bit higher. They are still below the state average.
that help?
Yeah, that helps. So their spending per equalized pupil is projected at $16,134. And again, the tax commissioner, when he did his announcement and calculations, projected $17,133. So they're still quite a bit below the state average. And their projected tax rate is $1.48. So that is a 5.69% increase. So their percent increase on the homestead tax rate is matching what the commissioner had estimated, but their tax rate is $1.48, and the commissioner has recognized that the average tax rate is $1.56.
So they're still significantly
So
below
they're
the state
still
average.
significantly below the state average. And their CLAs are also very favorable. They're at 99 and 95%. But again, the prior year they were a little bit higher. So, Mendon, for example, last year was 102%. So the tax rate of $1.40 was reduced down a little bit because of that 102%. This year they're at 95%. So that's a 7% shift in CLA. And so that's a 7% increase in taxes when it comes to the actual tax rate. Again, just like in Otter Valley, this is the worst case. This is before any provisions for income sensitivity.
And when is their annual meeting?
Theirs is the night before on February 25th at 6:30 at Barstow Town Hall.
Okay.
And we do hope that people come and ask questions. And, as I started out saying, that next year's budget process actually begins with this year's budget passage.
Sure.
So the conversation at town meetings, the questions of the community kind of starts us thinking, how are we going to approach next year? And so that voice is really important. Even if you're happy with where the budget is, it's still helpful to hear from people. And I hope they attend either the Barstows or Otter Valley's town meetings.
Totally. Great. So just the other thing, I just want to overview as far as both of them, really no changes in anything other than we're mainly adding support staff for most of the schools.
Direct instruction staff, yeah.
Right, and that we are not making any changes as far as facilities or anything like that at this point.
We're not through the budget.
Okay.
That being said, as you know, in Otter Valley is using its reserve fund to make changes to the front of the building over this summer.
Right.
And that's not, the reserve fund is previous year surpluses that the community has already voted on to be used for capital expenses.
Sure.
And so that front entrance really does have some significant issues, and it was part of a bond vote that did not succeed, but the board felt as though the needs of that front entrance are significant enough and affordable enough that they're going straight to the reserve fund to pay for that particular need. And they have just completed updating the handicap access bathrooms in the high school. But
Awesome.
Other than that, there are no major facilities plans this summer.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for your help, and we'll see you next time on RNESU Spotlight. Thanks.